Hello everyone and welcome to my UDK tutorial series. In this particular episode I'm going to be going over post-process volumes. Now while this may not be as long of a video as some of my others, I do feel that the post-process volumes are something worthy of going over. They're not incredibly useful in large outdoorsy levels just because of the nature of how they work. But if you're doing levels in lots of rooms, and you want to apply post-process effects to the various rooms, then they're quite useful. While if you wanted a really professional-looking, high-quality effect, you may want to do stuff with materials. Post-process volumes can get the effect done as well. So, what is a post-process volume? Now, obviously, the volume part is self-explanatory, but the post-process might not be as much. What a post-process is sort of an effect that a level designer puts in that he wants applied in certain circumstances. They can be different depending on the volume, but it's an effect that is applied that happens after everything else has been rendered, basically. So after the lighting, after bloom effects, after material effects, even after like light shafts and stuff are rendered, geometry, whatever, and then it's applied over that and overwrites a lot of the other things. Well, not necessarily overwrites, but changes and sort of adds to. So we can have something like a desaturation effect applied, or you can do lots of depth of field effects with blurriness, or you can really increase the bloom if you want to, and you can do lots of different colorization effects as well, and it just lots of things to do with like camera things that you could do with camera effects. You can just apply without actually having to add a camera into the level and then assign it to a player and do all of that stuff. It's just a post-process effect. And the post-process effects also stack with camera effects. So if you have like a camera effect that has like a blurry effect or something, and then you stick it in a post-process volume, that colorizes something, well, it'll then be blurry with a colorization. So you can use this sort of to your advantage if you want to do fancy cinematic stuff where camera passes through like a section that is what's it called? Has a post-process volume, and it looks a little different than it might with the player going through because the camera has some stuff to it and the post-process has some stuff to it, and they look a little bit different. And you could also use this to advantages with doing desaturation, where you may have like a security camera be black and white, but the player is also black and white, but then some other camera isn't. If you're trying to do like some, I don't know, make a game that has to do with color, you use a special ability and color appears and then it disappears. I don't know. I'm just kind of pulling stuff together, but anyway, let me just kind of jump into this, start showing what this stuff is. So if I walk in or fly in here rather, you can see everything is desaturized completely. Even some of the actual stuff in the engine, where like the translator widget, this light, and the spawn point is desaturized as well. So that can sometimes get a little bit annoying whenever you're creating your levels and you have, like, for instance, a heavy blur effect on a post-process. It can get really hard to see your level. So if you want to, you can turn off the whole display the post-process in the editor thing by clicking this little button right here. And then it'll just turn it off, and you'll only be able to see it whenever you play it. So, but I'm going to leave it on for demonstration purposes. So if I select this and bring it up, and I go down to the scene desaturation, that is the only thing I have changed in this entire thing. So that's the only thing I've changed. It was at 0. Now if I set it to 0, whoops, you can see color. But if I set it to like 0.5, set that to 0.5, we've got a little bit of color. So it kind of dulls the colors that are already there, and then you can only really see bright colors. So this blue is normally like a really bright blue, but now it's sort of darker, and we can't really see much else. We can see the red, the green, and the blue from the translation widget. The yellow is pretty faded. We can see a little bit of this pink from the widget itself, or the post-process volume itself, but everything else is sort of faded. So, which is not a whole lot of color in this by default anyway, but anyway, you can get the point. So that's pretty much the desaturation. This is a pretty basic post-process, but I wanted to do something that was pretty simple to start off with, because the next thing that I did in here is kind of wonky, and I did that on purpose because I wanted to do something that was really interesting. The lighting needs to be rebuilt. That is not actually true, but anyway. So hop in here, and this starts happening. Oh, that's why the lighting needs to be rebuilt. There's some kind of... Oh wait, I know. Okay, because I moved this barrel earlier. Okay, never mind. Okay, but let me just come back in here. So, we've got some bloom effects, of course. We've got bloom effects out there, and we've sort of got a colorization to the level, a little sort of reddish, a very slight reddish tint, but it's there. So, obviously we've got like a massive bloom effect out here, just bloom everywhere, and it's changing as the sky itself is moving. But that's one reason that you want to be very careful about these post-process and where you put them, because it applies to the entire level whenever you're inside of it. So basically anything that you look at whenever you're inside the post-process volume will be essentially have the post-process effect applied to it. So it's not like only things inside of this room are going to have this effect applied to them. It's going to be everything, and whenever you step outside of the volume is whenever it changes. So that's one thing you have to keep in mind whenever you're making these. You don't want to just stick it in like the middle of a field somewhere and just walk into the middle of the field and all of a sudden everything around you changes. But let me get this back to the effect that it's supposed to be, because when I was playing around with it, I changed it up a little bit. I need to reapply this. And if I hop back inside here, now we get the full effect, because it's supposed to be real blurry too. So you can see it's all blurry and everything as well. So we got a nice blur. So it's even blurry whenever I walk up here as well. So okay, that's post-process volume. So interesting, very interesting indeed. And then of course the desaturation. So very different volumes give very different effects. And while this one is not really designed to imitate anything, you can sort of see how you can stack all of these effects together. Now, let's actually get to this. If I hop in here, you can see the bloom effect actually has a color to it, as does these out here. Normally, you can see the normal color is sort of already a yellowish, but it sort of, I guess, stacks with it over here. I don't know what the actual sun itself would look like. I would imagine that would be really blindingly large if the bloom effect is already that big. But anyway, so we've got a yellowish bloom tint. If I change this to, like, I don't know, that, we hop in here and you can see it's now changed. So fairly simple to change. There you go, changed again. We can see out here, that's what it looks like. So now the reason it's not showing up right there as the cyan color is because that's just the color of the way the light itself is behaving. If I move a little bit and get to where the bloom shows up again, it's the bloom is the cyan. But that right there is just the light. And the light shafts, let's see, those aren't going to be showing up either, because those are just light shafts, not bloom. So if you'll have to actually get it, because the one reason it's not showing up is because of the depth of field that I have. So it's kind of hiding a lot of the bloom until I get, close enough to it. So for right there, you can't really see a bloom right there. But yeah, see, okay, now you can, because it's just the way the depth of field is working out that you can't see some of the bloom. So anyway, now other things, I mean, you can see we have enabling various things. You can enable, disable certain aspects. You can scale up the bloom. So if I set this to like 100 and look at it, let's set it to 20 and like 200. So there you go. We're starting to get like, if you set it to really high values, it's going to look really weird because it's not supposed to be set to really high values. This is just going to look really, really wonky. But I'm setting it to high values so you can just sort of see the real difference. Normally you'd want to set it to something like 10 or something, where it's not a very large bloom effect. It's just sort of a slight thing, so that it looks a little better like that. But anyway, bloom threshold. The threshold, let's see, it's supposed to, there's several things that have like fall off exponents or thresholds and stuff. Let's see, if I set this up, some of these things don't really seem to change all that much for me. I've tried messing around with some of them. Okay, there. That's just completely blinding. Okay, so threshold changes that. Which I believe what it is changing is sort of like where it's allowed, like how far the bloom is allowed to like display. Something sort of like the range, I guess, would be appropriate in that case, because like the sky is just overwhelming with the threshold not set to 1. And then if I set it to that, it's not even going to display a bloom at all. So I imagine that has to do with the range. From just, I've been testing with some of this stuff and trying to figure out what it is, and so that's what it seems to me is to be sort of the range of the bloom itself. So that with the scaling is something you'll have to play around with. Now, the same thing, screen blend. So that's just a similar setting for screen blending. Interpolation. Anything that says interpolation, like interpolation duration, is essentially how long it takes to change from what it is normally without the post-process volume to what it is with the post-process volume. So if you want like a sort of delay before everything is just, change to the post-process effect, you'll set an interpolation there. Now, you can actually set it for each individual effect. So, this is always usually last in the settings. So everything above this that has to do with blooming will be with this value. So you can set the various interpolation to different amounts for different things, which can make for some interesting effects if you have like a really long interpolation for the bloom and like a short one for depth of field. You can get like some interesting sort of like continuous changing effects. But this is in seconds, so it takes 10 seconds for it to fully appear, which is why I have everything set to 10, which is why whenever I walk in here, you'll see that it takes 10 seconds before everything starts really starting to change. So you can see it's slowly growing larger out there. And then it changes to the color, and then the depth of field is there as well. So anyway, now the depth of field, DOF, kernel size is basically how blurry it is. So if I set this to 0, okay, it's supposed to be, oh no, the blur bloom. Okay, so if we look at this blur now, you can see that's kind of what it is. If I do 32, now you can see sort of that's how it's sort of, okay, that's way too high, way too high. So you can see sort of how that affects the bloom itself. So we can see there, and then 0 there, the difference in the way the bloom is being done. And so out there, so basically setting it at 0 reduces like the number of pixels involved in the bloom. It sort of it reduces like the radius sort of the bloom, like because it's like a ball, and then it has like that shining edge to it. That shining edge, it disappears if you set it to 0, and so it's just like the center of it. So if I set this back up to 32, you'll see the sections that were there before, whenever I had set it to 0, are still there, but now there's that shining edge to it, so it's all blurred together. So that's kind of what this sets, is how much of that is there whenever you view it. So you could actually get some interesting looking things if you set it to 0. If you have a lot of different bloom effects going off together, there won't be any shining edges to it, but it'll just be sort of that, like this. It'll just be this, which can look kind of cool if you do it right. So that's an option you can play around with. I'm going to set it back to 32. Now the fall off exponent, I've tested, and I even was looking at a tutorial, like just a written thing online, and it says this is supposed to do like even the tooltip exponent to apply to blur amount after it's been normalized. It's sort of like the has to do with like fading, but I never noticed any difference. So I don't know what's up with that. I can't really explain that to you. I've changed the values and I've never noticed a difference with anything. So. But the depth of field blur kernel size is what changes up the blur amount. That I was getting that confused with the bloom. So if I set this to 0, no depth of field blurring at all, and you can see this the bloom effect really well. And then if I set it to 1, that 1. We've got like a really slight blurring. It's like just enough to mess with your vision, where it's like really annoying, but not enough to know that there really is a huge blur effect going on. So it's like that really annoying kind of blur. Let's see. And if I set it up to like 10, then there's that. And so as we set this up, this is again, same thing with the bloom. It's just sort of increasing like the kernel, the pixels or whatever that is being involved in the blur, and we can just set this up even further and even further, and by that point, by 1,000 or by 100, really, there's nothing else you can really do to increase the blur much higher. I mean, we could add even more zeros after this. It's not really going to do anything. So let's set it back to 100. So I had it set to 200, but it's no different than 100. So, all right, max near. If we set this up, or actually set that to 0. Now let's set this down a little bit. Okay, so max near, it basically the minimum and max, max near, minimum, max far. This all has to do with like the distance of the depth of field effect that is being applied. Sort of like if you've messed with fog or other similar things that it's just sort of the distance that it's being processed at is sort of what it has to do. And you have your focus type, so you could actually focus on a specific point. So if you wanted something to be applying the blurring, so something is blurring your vision, maybe you could do that instead of just having it based off of distance. If you can do that if you wish to. And just depth of field, if you want your position, focus position, you can set that with X, Y, Z coordinates, focus distance, radius, so on and so forth. I'm just going to kind of go through this pretty quickly. And then you have your interpolation duration. And I don't know what a bokeh texture is, or bokeh texture. I'm sorry, I don't know what that is. But then you have motion blur stuff. If you wish for motion blur, you can set those. Your scene motion blur is pretty self-explanatory. And then your scene colors, which I do have a little bit of a colorization here. So we have like the scene desaturation, of course. The scene colorize, which essentially is just over the entire thing, which is what I actually have. So I have like the Y down a little bit, which is the green, so I have sort of a purplish effect. So the X, the Y, and the Z essentially are RGB values for red, green, blue. X being red, green being Y, and blue is Z. So if you lower one, the other two will come out a little bit more, which is why I have this purple effect, because I've lowered the green a little bit. And then you can apply some image graining for shadows in the tone mapper, various things. The scene highlights, the scene midtones, and the scene shadows essentially affect the white point, gamma, and the black point respectively. So changing those, like for instance, if I change the scene shadows, I stick this to all 1, 1, 1. I'm going to get entirely black, just complete darkness whenever I come in here, because I'm setting all of the various points of that can be black, and now if I set all of the highlights to like, okay, the highlights, if I set one of these values right here to 0, it's going to be like a solid color. No, I actually have to change these back to 0. No, that is not what I wanted to do. So I'm getting like a solid color because I've changed the white point to where it's just like the X and the Y coming out. Now I can set the Z back so that brings that color in, and so now we've got all three back in there. But essentially that's what you can do. And then the midtones are sort of just the have to do with the brightness of various aspects of everything. But you can kind of change these up as need be. And when I was just kind of changing some of these values, you could see you can do some interesting effects. So I've got one aspect of just like the shadows is just completely black, so I sort of get like this cool orange effect with everything, and part of everything is black. And of course with the depth of field and stuff, it almost looks sort of like these barrels are all sort of kind of translucent a little bit. Well, no, that was just because I had this selected. But anyway, and then you could switch that to a different section of the shadows. Now I've got like a red color. I can get rid of this one again, and then I've got a purple color. So all of these colors, I get kind of confused myself sometimes what all of these different colors change and everything. There's so much into each individual thing you can change, because I've just changed a couple values here and I've gotten like so vastly different colors. So it's kind of hard keeping track of all of these different color values and what they all do, because each one of these is affecting a different individual part of the level, which affects the entire thing as a whole. Well, not the level, but the post-process volume itself, which is affecting all of these different things, and there's so much math going on, it's ridiculous. So anyway, that's all of the various colorization things. You can just play with these as much as you want to get the exact effect you want to. The only really way to figure out how this all works is to just mess around with changing some values, as I've been doing here. That's the only way you're going to figure out how it all works together. So now, like I said earlier, the interpolation is just how long it takes for this effect, for this to show up. Now, in the editor, it's just going to go instant. But whenever you walk in here through the player thing, it'll take 10 seconds for this to fully come into effect. Now the rim shader color, I'm not sure what the rim even does, to be honest. I'm not sure what the rim shader is for. I mean, I could try changing the value to see, but it doesn't really do anything. So I don't know what the rim does. I've not found out. I mean, there's just a color option, so more colors to play with, I suppose. And then mobile post-processing, which is going to have some similar options, but less of them, because it's mobile and it has to be fairly optimized. No, that's pretty much your post-process. Again, I do apologize for some of the things that I was not entirely certain about. Some things are just kind of confusing and don't want to work correctly. But anyway, hopefully that made sense, and if you have any questions, let me know. I can try and answer as best as possible. But that's about it. So I will see you all in another video.